Ready for a deep dive into English? We're talking like the nuts and bolts today. Getting those fundamentals down, it's always good to revisit, even if you think you've got the basics.
Yeah. It's like you got to make sure that foundation is strong, right?
Exactly. We found this awesome beginner English lesson plan, and it got us thinking about all those little rules we use without even realizing it.
Like what?
Okay, so picture this. You're trying to compliment someone's, I don't know, like a really cool red hat.
Okay, red hat, I'm with you.
Red hat. See how we just said that? Red, then hat. This lesson plan points out that in English, the adjective red goes before the noun hat. But in other languages, like Spanish, it's the opposite.
Yeah, that's a big one. Word order can really trip people up when they're first learning English. And it's something that native speakers totally take for granted.
Right, and it's these little things, these almost invisible rules that can really make a difference, especially for beginners.
Absolutely. Because once you understand the why behind those rules, it's like you unlock a whole new level of fluency.
It's like having the cheat codes to the language.
Exactly. Now, speaking of things that trip people up,
Oh, yeah.
pronunciation. That's another big one, right?
Huge. Even when you think you know a word, those sneaky little sounds can really throw you off.
Totally. And this lesson plan actually highlights a few common pronunciation pitfalls. Like, for example, the word small.
Oh, I remember struggling with that one. It's so tempting to add an extra sound in there, right?
It is, especially for Spanish speakers, because in Spanish, you wouldn't usually start a word with that isome sound without a vowel before it, so your brain tries to help out.
It's like your brain is playing a trick on you. I know, I'll just add a little something extra in there.
But in English, it's just a clean, crisp, small. And it's those tiny differences that can really impact how well people understand you.
It's like you could have the most amazing vocabulary in the world, but if you're not pronouncing things clearly, it's like trying to have a conversation with a mouthful of marbles, you know?
Best analogy ever. Speaking of tricky words, we were fascinated by what the lesson plan said about the verb to be.
Oh, to be. Yeah, that one's a real doozy, especially if you're coming from a Romance language like Spanish.
Right. Because in English, this one little verb has to do the work of two verbs, ser and estar. It's like it's working overtime.
No wonder it causes so much confusion. It's like this poor little verb is trying to wear two hats at the same time.
Yeah. But here's the thing. It's actually not as complicated as it seems once you get the hang of it. So let's say you're describing something like, the sky is blue. That's a pretty straightforward use of to be, right?
Totally. You're just stating a fact.
Right. But now imagine you want to say where something is, like the book is on the table.
Okay, so same verb, different function. It's about location now.
Exactly. And that's where a lot of learners get tripped up. They're used to having separate verbs for those two concepts. But in English, it's all about context.
Makes sense. And you know what else this lesson plan pointed out? Something I never even thought about, but it totally makes sense.
What's that?
The words where and what can sound super similar, especially if someone's speaking quickly.
Oh, totally. I actually had this hilarious experience when I was traveling once.
Oh, I love a good travel story. What happened?
Okay, so picture this. I'm in a foreign country, completely turned around, and I asked this very kind person for directions, right? And I could have sworn they said, "What?" when I asked where something was.
Oh, no. Did you end up even more lost?
I did for a hot minute, but we figured it out eventually. It was a good laugh, though, once we realized the miscommunication. It really just goes to show how important those subtle sound distinctions are.
Absolutely. It's like one tiny sound can make all the difference. But hey, you lived to tell the tale, and now you've got a great story.
Exactly. And speaking of stories, this lesson plan also got us thinking about two little words that are essential for telling any good story. Why and because.
You know, I never really thought about them as storytelling words, but you're totally right. Why sets up the mystery, the intrigue, and then because swoops in with the explanation.
Exactly. And they're not just for stories. They're everywhere. Why did you do that? Because I felt like it. They're like the question and answer duo of the English language.
The dynamic duo fighting for clarity in a world of confusion.
I like that. But here's the thing. Even these seemingly simple words can trip up English learners, especially those whose first languages treat why and because as practically the same sound.
Yeah, this lesson plan mentioned that. I think they use Spanish as an example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like porque and porque are super close in pronunciation. But in English, why and because, totally different sounds.
So it's one of those things where if you're not careful, you can end up accidentally saying why when you mean because or vice versa.
Exactly. And that's a recipe for confusion.
Yeah.
So this lesson plan, it actually provides a really handy pronunciation guide.
Ooh, a guide. Okay, let's break it down for our listeners. Expert speaker, hit us with the correct pronunciation of why.
All right, so they use this symbol, wei. It's like Y is trying to be all fancy with its phonetic transcription. But basically, they're emphasizing that it's not pronounced like Y, which is closer to how it might sound in Spanish.
So it's all about that diphthong, that iwa sound.
Yes, a subtle difference, but important.
And what about because? That one's a bit of a tongue twister for me sometimes.
Yeah, that iwa sound in the middle can be tricky. It's pronounced bine has gos, definitely not like, say, be co-use, which would be more of a French pronunciation.
It's like English just loves to keep us on our toes with these little pronunciation quirks.
It does. But think of it this way. Mastering those quirks is what gives you that extra edge, that fluency that makes people go, wow, their English is amazing.
It's like you've leveled up your language skills. So what does all this mean for our listeners? They've now explored the power of adjectives, tackled the verb to be, and they're well on their way to mastering why and because.
They're building a solid foundation. They've got the tools, and now it's all about putting them into practice.
Exactly, because what good are tools if they just sit in your toolbox, right? It's like you've been in English boot camp, you've got all the best gear, now it's time to actually use it, right?
Exactly. It's time to take those skills out for a spin in the real world.
So for our listeners who are ready to graduate from English boot camp, what's one thing they can do today to start using what we've talked about?
Let's see. Well, I always say, pay attention to how you're already using language. Right? Next time you're ordering coffee, try throwing in a few extra adjectives just for fun.
Oh, I love that. Instead of just a coffee, it's a steaming, velvety, perfectly roasted coffee.
Exactly. Or if you're asking for directions, really listen to how the other person uses to be. Are they saying where something is, or are they describing it?
It's like you're turning everyday conversations into these little learning opportunities. And the best part is, you don't have to be perfect.
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, the more you're willing to experiment, the more you're going to learn. It's all about embracing those mistakes.
Because those mistakes, those are your little stepping stones to fluency.
I love that. Stepping stones to fluency. And, the more you use these building blocks, these fundamental pieces of English, the more confident you're going to become.
And that confidence, that's what makes all the difference. Because when you feel good about your English, you're not afraid to use it, to connect with people, to share your thoughts and ideas.
Exactly. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Connecting with others, sharing experiences, using language to bridge those gaps.
Perfectly said. Well, there you have it, folks. We've explored the fundamentals, we've tackled some tricky pronunciation, and we've even shared a few laughs along the way.
And hopefully we've inspired you to get out there and use your English skills with confidence.
Absolutely, because every conversation is a chance to learn and grow. So go forth and speak boldly, my friends. Until next time, happy learning.